the textbook for land use law in law school. Doesn't look like very much, does it? Not really. And here's the Florida Planning and Zoning Official Handbook. Probably a lot more stuff in this than there is in that. The point being that you guys deal with so much that I don't know if you appreciate it sometimes. I hope you know, but you deal with so much more than that first-year law student does, and you're expected to make decisions on these things too. So what I'd like to do first is give you a 5-minute, several hundred-year history of land use law. Okay? In days of old, you know, and if you look in the Florida statutes, the common law of England is still in effect in Florida. That's right. Section 1.02, I think it is. It says the common law of England in effect on July 4th, 1776 is in effect in Florida, to the extent that it's not been changed by statute or other. Okay. But if there's not a statute that changes it, common law is still in effect. And it's used all the time in the courts. I've used it in courts successfully. But what was the common law? Well, the original common law was the king owned everything. There wasn't much law to it because, you know, the king owned your land, my land. You know, you couldn't go hunting for foxes or squirrels on my land, says the king, unless you want to risk having your head chopped off. And I'm not exaggerating, okay? And, you know, ultimately, some private property was allowed by the barons and the like, you know, mostly to appease the king. Well, actually, mostly to raise taxes. That was the real goal, is that, you know. But the law, what was the law of land use at that time? It's real simple. If I gave you an easement, then you had a right. Okay? If you trespassed on my land, I had a right. Okay? And then there was some private nuisances. If you put your pig stuff over on my land, I had a right against you. Okay? That was basically it. That was land use regulation. Okay? And under the common law, that's when we became a nation, that was land use regulation. We had the English law as land use regulation. Okay? Now, as we developed into cities, that became a problem. Because you may not like living or buying a house and then having a rendering plant, an animal rendering plant constructed next door. That happened. Okay, because there was no zoning. There was no zoning. Okay? And then this wild thing occurred. A bunch of planners got together and they developed this concept of City Beautiful. Is that what it was called? City Beautiful. So that you could have planned cities. But that's a nice concept and it's a nice dream, but without regulations, it doesn't mean a whole lot. So some cities actually adopted that City Beautiful concept, and they tried something called zoning. And one of them was the city of Euclid, Ohio. Now, you've heard of Euclidean zoning? You've heard that mentioned, right? And when I was, for the first time I heard it, I thought it was some mathematical formula or something like that Euclid had developed. But no, it's really coming from the city of Euclid, who determined to zone property. And Ambler Realty Company, who owned a lot of land in the city of Euclid, said, you can't do that. You can't tell me what to do with my land. That's against my property rights. Okay? And that issue went through the courts, went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, you can zone. Major breakthrough in the law. You can zone. Okay? And that was the law. Well, zoning's nice. We all appreciate it to some extent. But what if you don't plan what you're going to zone? That presents a problem, doesn't it? You know, if you say we're going to have residential zoning here, that's really great. But what if you allow an industrial use next door? That's not probably a good plan, right? Or what if you allow, well, as we just saw, and what happened out in Texas? without regulations in terms of floodplain. Tremendous carnage when the hurricane came through, right? Okay, so there was zoning, but there wasn't planning. So some jurisdictions, and I know some people think, only crazy, my father used to tell me this, only crazy things happen out in California, you know. But California and Oregon started planning. They started developing planning laws, enacting planning laws. And in the 1970s, that planning concept drifted its way over to Florida. And actually, you know where it drifted first? Seminole County. Because Seminole County enacted a comprehensive plan a year before the state mandated that that local governments enact comprehensive plans. Seminole County government actually went to the legislature and said, make us plan. Make us plan. And we did. And I think it's worked out fairly good. I don't know about y'all, how you all feel about it. I don't live in Seminole County. But, you know, I drive through lots of communities, lots of counties, and you've been to other states. And when you get to Seminole County, you can sense. You drive down I-4, you can sense something. You know, how things have been actually planned. You know, if you look at it aerially, you have the Econ rural area. You have the Wekiva River area. Now, there were some exceptions in the Wekiva because God bless his soul, Everett Husky got to develop before there was any environmental protections. But still, basically, you can see how the county's planned, the I-4 corridor. It's intended to be intense. It was planned to be intense. The rural area was planned to be rural. Anyway, but planning laws were implemented in the state. Okay? And the first planning law was sort of, you should do it. Okay? Later on, the legislature enacted a Growth Management and Land Development Regulation Act that said you must do it. And if you don't do it, local governments, we're going to take your sales tax revenues away. We're going to take your cigarette tax revenues away. We're going to take revenues away. And we're going to make you go to the governor and cabinet, and that's what's going to happen to you if you don't plan right. Okay? So, comprehensive planning became a big deal. Okay? And to the extent that, and I think I've shown you some of y'all the photos, there was a case in Martin County where a retired paralegal or court reporter, I forgot her name, didn't like something that was happening next door to her subdivision. This developer was developing apartments, and she said, that's too dense. It's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. And she went to her local government, and local government says, no, we agree with the developer. And she took the developer to court, and the developer meanwhile said, we're not going to listen to this lady. We're going to go ahead and build our apartments. We're going to win this case. And they went ahead and built these apartments. Back then, I think it was in the 90s, it was still $6 million. I don't know about you, but $6 million a day is still a significant figure to me. And put $6 million into the construction of these apartments, and Ms. Scheidel won her case in the courts. And the developer said, okay, I guess I lost. But the people in that subdivision only, if you did an appraisal report, the people in that subdivision, they only lost $260,000 total for the 60 or so lots. If you make me tear my apartments down, I lose $6 million. That doesn't seem fair, does it? The court said, maybe not, but tear down your apartments. And I can show you photos, and some of you all have seen them, where the cranes are there tearing your apartments. So comprehensive planning is a big deal. And that's what you are. You're the local planning agency, the land planning agency. You're in charge of the comprehensive planning program of this city. So that's your position in the law of land use in Florida. Okay? It's a pretty significant position. Okay? Now, there's only a couple of things that overcome local governments. One of them is the federal government, obviously. So you're bound by Fair Housing Act requirements, preemption, the preemption clause and the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution says federal government supreme. I think they're supremely idiotic from what we just saw this past weekend. But anyway, Fair Housing Act, that will prevail. Religious, Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Protection Act, that applies. So you can't do anything that you can't. Local governments can't contradict the Fair Housing Act, can't contradict other acts like I just RLUIPA. It's easy to say it by acronym. But by and large, local governments are free, except for federal control. Okay, that used to be the case, at least, because right now state government is starting to say we don't like what local governments are doing, and we're going to start taking things away from local government. And they did that with marijuana, which, by the way, is still illegal under federal law, but that's another story. And then this session, there was even a bill proposed that would take tree regulation away from local government.
You just mentioned that.
So anyway, but by and large, to the extent that the federal government doesn't take jurisdiction away from states and local governments, or the state government doesn't take jurisdiction away from local governments, you are it. You are it. So when someone desires to develop their property, you have a lot of control. But they have a lot of rights. And that's why I want to talk about quasi-judicial processes real quick. Okay. When a person comes before you, they're entitled to three things. And these are the three things that a court will look at when they review a decision of a local government. Okay. They're going to say, was procedural due process given to that person? Okay. What's procedural due process? A fair hearing. A fair hearing. Did they get notice of the hearing? Did they get an opportunity to be heard? And did they get a fair adjudication? That's what procedural due process is all about. I want to ask the chairman something. Somebody gets in front of you and says at a hearing, I'm here to protest because I didn't know about this hearing. I didn't get notice of this hearing. Well, what would your response be?
I'd ask staff about the notice.
Well, why don't you ask them, why are you here then? I have seen that happen so often. Someone will come in and say, I didn't get notice of this hearing tonight. And you go, hey, you're here. Anyway, but you're entitled to notice. Okay, you're entitled to an opportunity to be heard. For how long? Reasonable opportunity to be heard. Reasonable opportunity to present evidence. Okay, and a fair adjudication. If anybody's biased, then you can't vote. And ironically, in Florida, as a public official, you have to vote at every time there's a vote. If you're on a board, you have to vote unless you have a conflict of interest. If you're just biased, you don't have a conflict of interest. But you still, as a quasi-judicial officer, you can't vote, though. And you have to fill out a voting conflict form saying you don't have, which says, I didn't vote, I didn't have a voting conflict, however, but I'm filling out this form. That's basically what it says. Okay. The other thing the courts look at is, did you apply the correct law? Okay. Which you'll also hear these words, conform with the essential requirements of law. Means that you apply the correct law. What's your correct law here? The Oviedo Land Development Code. Okay? What if you, and I've heard this, not necessarily here, but in other jurisdictions. Well, Winter Park has better setbacks than, how come, I'll tell you, I got this one, someone in the audience one time in Sanford got up and said, well, how come we have to take the Dollar General, this, and then under this site plan, the one in Winter Park, and I think they might have said Oviedo too, the one in Oviedo, they got this. What's the difference? That's the difference. So, if that says you get to have
80% impervious, 80% of a lot developed in an impervious way, and you think 70% would be better, what do you apply? 70% or the 80%? Applying the correct law is 80%. Might 70% be better? Yeah. What if the code says you can plant palm trees, but you've been to Winter Park, and you know palm trees don't look as nice as big old huge oak trees, right? You say, well, I want them to plant oak trees. You know what the answer to that is? Too bad. The code says palm trees. So if you don't like the code, what should you do? Recommended it be changed. Okay. So due process, applying the correct law. And the third thing is that the court will look at is there substantial competent evidence of record to show that your decision is correct. Now, y'all have watched TV shows or whatever where there's a criminal trial. And if you go to a criminal trial, you'll hear this phrase until you're sick to your stomach about it. Beyond a reasonable doubt, right? You're not bound to that standard. Okay? Not at all. There's another standard that's used in civil cases, and there's two standards basically. One is the preponderance of the evidence. What's preponderance mean? More evidence than the other side. Clear and convincing means, well, obviously it must be a preponderance, but it also is clear and convincing. What that means is what the court says it means. Okay? You're not bound by those either. You're just bound by substantial, competent evidence of record. That there's some evidence that supports your decision. Okay? Some evidence. So what's the contrary of that? To overcome your decision, there has to be no evidence. Okay. So at the end of a hearing, after you've given due process, after you've applied the correct law, and you evaluate the evidence, it's important, and I know y'all make recommendations, but I'm going to sort of assume, let's say you actually are the adjudicator, okay? And some, you would make findings. And actually, you should make findings to help the city council, too. When you make a recommendation, you should make findings, particularly if you recommend denial. You need to make findings. Because Teresa, why did they recommend that?
Yeah, and we haven't asked
yeah.
that question.
Well, it was unanimous. Well, that's interesting, but why did all of them vote that way then? You say, I don't know. That doesn't help much, does it?
Mm-hmm.
We've had that issue this past year, too.
I know. That's why make findings. Even if you're not actually issuing a development order, go ahead and make findings. So that will help Teresa, that will help the city council. But let's assume you were going to actually make the decision. That's what you need to have a development order. And we do development orders now. And what do those development orders have? A discussion about the procedures, sort of. Mm-hmm. There was a hearing. Discussion about the law, what was considered, what parts of the land development code. And there's a discussion about what decision was made and why. Okay? And you have that development order, which then shows you just complied with all the things I just said are necessary to sustain the decision. And if you end up in court, I don't get asked then, well, why did they make that decision? And I'm in the same. I can remember doing this. Well, Commissioner Kershaw said this and made fun of the developer about cypress trees. And Commissioner Christensen said this. And Commissioner Glenn said this. And Commissioner Sturm said that. And Commissioner Streetman said this. The court said, well, that's all interesting. Why did they make the decision? I don't know. There was 5 votes. They all said different things. Okay, but a development order, I can say, well, here's why, Judge. You can read it with me if you like. It's part of the record anyway. Here's the development order. Here's why the city made that decision. Okay, and that should be, whether you're making a recommendation or an actual determination, what results, is findings. Because that should be the end process of a quasi-judicial hearing. Okay?
Want to go interject?
Yeah, now's the great time.
Excuse me, the mics are live now, so we can actually pick up what you're saying.
These working?
Yeah.
Okay. When somebody is, when we're making findings, because during the course of our hearings, we are always citing what our rationale is and why we're arguing for a particular point. I know we all do. But then when we go to vote, exactly like you're saying, we vote based on what we've just discussed. But you're right, we don't record the rationale for the way we're voting. Do you suggest that maybe prior to the vote, somebody takes notes on exactly what the rationale behind
Sure.
where voting is, and who would you say?
Well, that's however you all want to organize it. I mean, usually my experience is there's usually, you don't have a secretary, but usually there's somebody who's better than, well, the chair can always summarize it. Well, here's what I understand us to be saying.
And then the person who's
And
taking notes in the meeting can record.
if no one says, hey, you're wrong, that's not what we're saying, then that's what's of record, and I think you could rely upon that. This chairman summarized that the view of the body was this. And you can go with that. But yeah, it's good to have a little summary, because otherwise it's just 4-3, 5-2, 5-0, whatever it is, and you go, why?
Okay. Thanks.
And also, I have seen such times when the poor planning director or others was asked by a council, and that's not here necessarily. Actually, it's not here at all. It's really happened a lot in another city that I used to work for. Why did they do this, Teresa? And Teresa would give her honest opinion, professional, this is why I understand. And the next meeting of the planning body, they were all over her case. Why did you say that? We didn't mean this, and we didn't mean that. And I was there too. And I said, yeah, it sounded like what you said last time. But, well, you can't argue. We can't argue with you. If you say something this time and we get it wrong, we got it wrong. If the next meeting you say, well, this is what we really meant, we can't argue with that. Because, you know what I'm saying? We can't argue with it. You're the one you knew your mind. We didn't. And if we summarized it wrong, we summarized it wrong, no matter how good faith it was. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, your views were expressed, and the decision was based upon that expression of your views, which may have been wrong. Which is why it's better for you to decide what you meant, as opposed to us to interpret what you meant.
Would it be proper if, after a vote is called, to, rather than just answering the affirmative or the negative, stating your basis for the vote?
Sure.
So based on blank, I vote yes?
As long as the chair allows it, yeah.
I guess this discussion for us to happen separate.
I mean, I don't think you need to do that every time.
No, on a big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
When
Yeah.
there's a place in the room full of people and everyone's angry. Probably a good idea.
There's only been a few times I can think of where that might have been a necessary situation.
I can only think of like one since I've lived there, so yeah. Exactly.
Now, one thing when I say that, I also, and I don't mean to tell you what to do, I'll just tell you my experiences. I'm getting to be old enough, I feel like I can tell, yeah. One thing I think that is and if I'm stepping on any toes, that's not intentional. One thing that I see consistently, first let me say it this way. Y'all have the vote. I didn't go through my normal spiel about you're one of the 12 people in the city of Oviedo. There's 7 of you, 5 council, right? You're one of the 12 people in the city of 37,000 that get the vote on land use issues. Okay? So you get a vote. That's pretty important. If I come and say something and I challenge if I challenge a developer, or if I say something that you just don't like, you don't have to debate me. You should be courteous to me. You should let me have my say. But you don't have to say, group, you were wrong because of this, 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 and this. You know, if you vote against what I said, you've told me that I was wrong. So there's no reason to say, well, you know, we do have a great environmental program, or we do have a good planning staff, or our decisions are, you know, always thoughtful, or whatever.
The only time I would contradict that statement, if the homeowners were representing themselves and don't know exactly what's going on. You know, but we don't get that.
What do you mean?
Just a regular homeowner coming in, you know, wanting to, you know, do his own thing without knowing what, you know, what he should be doing, opposed to,
Oh, I
to a
understand.
developer coming in with an architect. They know the guidelines. So.
No, that's called guiding someone. You know, someone comes in and they want a crazy deviation for their backyard, and you know, and they're getting all ticked at you because obviously you may, well, not obviously, but you may not be. It may be clear that you're not inclined to grant it, and now they're getting mad, and you can say, you know, we don't do this. This is something that we haven't done before, and it's bad for your neighbors, and explaining it. I agree, you know, that whether or not in these days and times you get a good reaction from that, I don't know. People want
This past year.
Okay. Other questions? Because I'm not going to go into the details. This is a paper I wrote on appealing and opposing and challenging a rezoning decision that I taught to. So it gets involved. Your job is very involved, but I'm not going to go into the details. But I would like to talk to you if you want to talk further about procedures. Nope.
I'll ask you this.
Okay.
I've been on this board a long time. 2000 maybe, when it was BOA before it became all the different name changes we've had. My feeling is when an applicant comes before us for some project, whether it's putting up a fence in the wrong place in their backyard, or their air conditioner pad needs to be in a place where it's not allowed or whatever, I want them to be able to tell us what their project is, what is it you're asking for, and tell me why we ought to vote for it. It doesn't have to be a PowerPoint presentation, but just knowledgeably be able to tell me what that is, rather than come up and say, well, I agree with staff report, and then they don't want to say anything else. I feel like if you can't tell me what it is, then why should I approve it? If you can't give me reasons for it.
Well, I will tell you this, and you and I have known each other a long time, so you know I'm as straight could be. I hope you know that.
I do.
Land use attorneys, planners are taught to do exactly what you just objected to. If they have a staff, if they have a staff recommendation, just get up and say, you know, here I am, I'm wearing a nice suit. You know, hope you're having a great day. I hope your favorite football team wins the Super Bowl, and sit down. And I'll tell you the reason for that is that, you know, I remember the summer before law school, I was a criminal investigative intern, and I was at this one hearing, and this poor young lawyer was arguing this case, and finally the judge said, "Son, I was going to rule for you 15 minutes ago, but the more you talk, the less likely it is." You know, because your arguments are defeating the reason I thought that I was ruling for you. And so it's just a lot wiser just not to say anything. Now, from the citizen side, just the regular old homeowner, you know, and this is one thing that I have had a hard time appreciating over time, because I forget how shy I used to be. So shy it was ridiculous when I was a kid. Okay, but one thing I forget over time is, and a lot of those folks are as petrified today as, you know. I was talking to some folks the other day who had been residents of this little town up in Volusia County since they were children, and they had some really serious issues with some things going on in government. And I said, well, do you ever speak at the city commission? No. And they're just afraid. They have stage fright a little bit, but they're also just afraid of government. And that's sad to me, but it's really, I've learned that it's pretty epidemic out there, and I wish it wasn't, because I think we'd have a lot more rational discussions if people weren't so daggone afraid, Does that make sense? But, so I think
It
I
does.
disagree with you a little bit, but, I would like to have people present things too, but they're just afraid. And like I said, the professionals are trained to shut up. If they think they got, Ken Wright, who you've all heard of, Chuds and Bowen, he had a great analysis about land use law, which is 3 votes beats a good argument any time. As long as you got the majority, 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 7, who cares, about the argument,
Most of the professionals that show up, though, are real, can't wait to talk
Detailed oriented.
Well, yeah, that's true.
and tell us.
And there's a reason for some of the, and some of the people who do that, by the way, do it because they want to prove that they did something. I mean, quite frankly, I'm representing a client and I've charged the fee, and I stand up and say I agree with staff recommendation. They go, I could have done that. I could. What did you do? And so it's sort of a putting on a show. Or if your client isn't there, you want to say, you send the minutes to him saying, I was there and look at the great argument I made, So there's some of that going on.
It's a balancing act.
It really is.
But she's right. Sometimes the homeowners don't give us enough information. We're going just on staff's recommendation. And we like to see what their impulse, their emotions about it, project. I can see both sides.
No, I got it, but that's.
Yeah, I think many of them feel intimidated with boards. And I think we had one situation last year that was a huge contrast because we had a professional who came and did the beautiful presentation, and she's great in presenting. And then following her, we had one that, and I'm just telling that some site plans are a long process, right? So they feel that they had, complied with comments, then submit comments. And so in the end of the process, some of them are just tired, and they just said, well, I did everything the city asked me to do. Staff is on board. I'm done. I'm presenting my 3D renderings here. So I think that applicant said, well, it's the end of the process, and he did not present. And I think it was kind of expected that he would present. I think he has the right to present.
If
I
it's
don't know if he has the obligation to present, right?
If it's the one I'm thinking of, he was the engineer of record, and he couldn't answer questions.
I think, well,
No, that's not good.
I'm talking about the applicant. Maybe the engineer was not,
One of them, after
Ready.
we'd had a particular attorney who had done a great presentation,
yeah.
then the next project was the engineer of record was here and couldn't answer a single question
That's a problem.
about the project.
And that's the one she's talking about.
Okay.
The engineer didn't have a clue. They kept referring back to and the guy also had that dumb face look. I'm like,
And I finally said, I'm sorry, I thought you said you were the engineer of record. And he was like, well, I am. Okay,
No,
all you
that's
did was,
that's
somebody else signed your name.
They should have been able to
To answer the
answer
question.
the question.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to, and y'all may disagree with this, but one time I think you could be expecting more from the public is when they come in and oppose them. Because it should be known out there, and Ms. Scheidel, who got those apartments torn down, that was her. It was an army of one, But you should know that it's not fair to y'all to come in and just say repetitively, I'm against it. I don't like it. Don't want it. Not in my backyard. You got to, particularly when there's staff recommends approval. I mean, you're not always right. I'm not always right. And if a council votes against you, do you cry at night?
No, we understand that we are recommending.
We're recommending.
that's it. Yeah.
But citizens have to come and give you some reasons, and they have the ability to do it. It's not that difficult to get on the Googles and challenge, some successful challenges and see how it's done, and actually give you some.
once again, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, it's not competent, it's not preponderance of the evidence, it's not clear and convincing. It's competent, substantial evidence, some evidence that allows you to say, okay, here's some maps that show how the area is, but look what this, here's a rendering that shows the intensity of this development next to all the other developments. It's just too intense. That's not just opinion. That's fact-based. Didn't take much to do that, but at least they got to do something, give you something. Okay. Can I go now?
No, can't go. He's ready to go.
Okay. Oh, let me just tell you one other thing. And this was a legislative staff report done in November 2004, which was there was a legislative proposal to do a land use board of appeals, which is basically a state land use board that would deal with local decisions, because the development community thought they were being treated so unfairly by local governments. And that's when the Snyder decision came out too, which but you haven't heard of this type of proposal. You haven't seen another Snyder decision come out. So things have gotten pretty doggone good at the local level with folks like you making decisions. So I think the developers have figured they're getting a fair chance at the local government level. Okay, that's all I got. Okay. Teresa wants me to discuss the LPA meeting day of the week. Y'all do Tuesdays, every other Tuesday and Thursday, or second and fourth Tuesday?
Second and fourth.
Second and fourth.
And I just can't do that. I have a city council meeting, and I would love to attend these meetings. I just can't do it on the second.
Now, do you have to be here, Lonnie?
Excuse me?
Do you have to be here?
No.
Or
We
do
can.
want Lonnie here? Or does the
There's
council-
times when we've wanted
Yeah.
Lonnie to be here.
Yeah, I would agree, yeah.
Yeah. What is your schedule? Which nights can you do?
I can do the first and third. Isn't that
First and third Tuesdays?
right? Isn't that right? Yeah. Yeah, first and third Tuesdays.
Teresa, would that work? Okay.
Well, that would be the same week of city council.
Yeah.
So
but
we
that-
will
but they're
have
on
two,
Monday,
yeah, 2 days
That's
in
would
a
be
row.
okay.
Is that
Back
okay
to
with you?
back.
That'd be work, but
That's fine with me.
What about staff?
That's-
come on. It's only 2 nights in a row.
And then it's done, it's over.
It's over.
Yeah, but the putting the reports together, it's,
Yeah,
you
they're
know,
preparing for totally
you're-
different
you're-
things.
You're doing 2 reports at the same time.
Yeah. What's going to council on Monday is not coming to us on Tuesday.
It has to be on Tuesday.
We haven't
So it
had that
is.
many meetings anyway.
That is true, but I mean,
Can't we vote against one of the other boards that doesn't have a vote on comprehensive plan out of the 12 people that do that? Can we bump one of the non-voting boards?
That's a good point. You do make a good, valid point on that.
I didn't get it, I'm sorry.
No, I mean like another night. I know that there's other boards sometimes meet. I think there was a conflict that we looked at that, don't you guys have other conflicts with other meetings that do?
no, we have now a third board, which is the Public Arts Board, but it meets once a month,
Oh, yeah.
and it's the second Wednesday. But this is a new board, so, I mean, LPA would have, we would change
Sovereign right.
that one, to accommodate LPA.
Would opposite Mondays work, with the Monday's second? Do we have another board on Monday?
Council
besides
does
city
work sessions. on
Work
Mondays.
sessions.
Mondays are no good.
Yeah, Mondays are.
Yeah, Mondays usually we reserve to.
All I'm saying is, does it have to be a Tuesday?
So it can
We
be
keep it the
Wednesday.
same alternating
But then
weeks, but
it-
just a
it's
different
up to you. I don't know if you're available on a
I only
Wednesday.
have one issue on Wednesdays, and that is the third Wednesday of every month.
That's
That's
gonna be
historic preservation.
the third,
First and third Tuesday.
for first and third Tuesday.
Teresa, as painful as it might be for staff, can we try the first and third?
We can. The only thing that will be, maybe a problem is that, we have to have a meeting on the 22nd. So, I mean, LPA would have, to accommodate LPA, would, have to have a meeting on the 22nd. So it can be Wednesday.
Okay.
But then it's up to you. I don't know if you're available on a Wednesday. is when we have to take things to LPA and then city council. We'll have to submit the packets in the same week, right? No, no, two.
Challenge is if we have, it'll just likely bump the period that the applicant would be waiting because of advertising.
Yeah,
Because right now, there's a 10-day window, I believe the
Yeah.
schedule. is-
So that'll bump it up, what, another 5 days?
There's enough gap in days between the LPA to the city council that we can have the public hearings back to back. But if they're tandem nights, then it'll bump the applicant to the following council. But that's the only immediate effect.
So it's an extra 7 days.
It might, if we have to advertise for at least 10 days, so it might translate to,
That'll be 14 days. So that'll be more,
It's another 2 weeks. Can you think of a situation that happens frequently where that could be a real issue?
we haven't gotten very many compliments. It only happens during compliments.
Okay. Well, can we try this for, say, at least 6 months?
we can, we don't oppose.
Because, I mean, let's face it, there's been months and months where we don't meet at all.
Sure.
So in those months, you guys are fine. If it gets to where things are popping up again, where we're having to do it often, then we certainly may have to address it.
No, and when
And
we
do
have
something
the
different.
full staff back, it's when we have the development review manager on board, and then review. Not every time I need to come. I have to come to city council meetings, so usually I come when there is a more controversial issue. Now I will come to all of them because we don't have one manager, so I'll come.
Do you have a timeline as to when you expect to have a manager on board?
We are interviewing, so we are hoping to be able to at least make a proposal in 2 weeks.
Planners are hard to recruit right now.
They are very
Because of
hard
the
to
development
recruit
boom.
right now. Yeah, and development review managers, I think, is a special, difficult position to fill because it requires specific,
So
skills.
perhaps a month from now, you could expect to have somebody ready?
Then we have the month. It's very optimistic because we made the
2 months.
proposal. Then a month and a half.
Okay.
Then we have the background check and then
You have to complain for a month at HR. right?
do we have
They
anything
should
coming
be
up?
up.
That's part of the
They are
deal.
so
Is there
you
anything
have
on
to
the
have
table
a
coming up for
month
us?
to HR, right?
what is that?
Is there anything coming up for us in the next couple weeks?
We're trying to get the golf course ordinance,
For the comp plan and zoning map amendment for our golf course that we are changing.
the CPA is too far out. Or
To
CPA.
nothing.
But we do have a lot of building permits that we haven't looked at this year. Have three set plans and 2 building permits that are due next week. So, but that will be closer to February, March.
And you have to advertise 10 days out?
Only public hearings.
Okay.
Those will be zoning amendments.
And development agreements, right? If it's a statutory development agreement.
So can I propose then that we try it for the first and third for 6 months?
Yeah.
And we'll know by April or May whether or not this is going to work or it's going to kill you guys, and then we'll have to come up with something different.
And we'll call them.
So you were
Yeah,
okay?
that's
Okay.
great.
That was
Look
one.
forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks
sir.
for good information, Lonnie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Good seeing you all.
Lonnie? Thank you.
Okay, Teresa, are you doing the landscape
Yes.
amendment?
So this is going to be a big picture discussion. We have already started writing the ordinance and the changes, but we don't have it as a final draft yet. So that's why I didn't share with you. But I said, you know what? Let's use this work session to discuss the changes that we are proposing and the changes that we are not proposing, because there is a movement, asking us to change things in the code that we want to remain the same, and we want to explain why. So, so we have a PowerPoint presentation, if you can show the next slide. So what we are changing is all the articles related to landscape. Article 12 is the article in the code that established the minimum landscape requirements, and that's for new development, that deals with a set of requirements for dealing with trees and landscape. Article 15 deals with environmental preservation, and we have a section that deals with tree replacement, and this is the section that we are changing, because the other sections that deal with wetlands, with well fields, it's all already established in our comprehensive plan. The Land Development Code just mirrors the language in the comp plan, so we are not proposing to change. And we are also removing language in Article 6 that deals with landscape. Article 6 is the one that deals with the downtown, the old and new downtown, all the mixed-use districts. So we are removing, language that deals with landscape and putting back in the Article 12 and 15. We are also clarifying the structure and some language. So it's basically trying to explain, what counts against what, and I'll go over a little bit. But it's just showing a different structure so that people that are not from the field can understand, what are the requirements and how they can apply the requirements. We are also making some changes that deals with tree maintenance. And Chris is our city arborist. I mean, he works informally as a city arborist. He doesn't have the title, but he's the one that we use, and he works for Public Works. So he's the one that goes on site to see if a tree is healthy or not, and if someone wants to change the type of tree that was approved on a plan, he would check if it meets the Florida, the friendly list of trees and all that. So we use Chris a lot, and that's why he's here. If you all have questions on the examples that we have in the city. We are also trying to deal with emergency situations, and the hurricane showed us that trees are great, but they are also, they can be a weapon, right, in a situation of a hurricane. So how can we be more proactive in allowing people to, remove trees that are in danger in a situation that we have a hurricane coming or something like that. So we will provide some language for that. And what I really want to discuss is it really a philosophical approach that we take on how we have two different set of standards, one for the minimum landscape requirements and another one for tree replacement, why we treat them separately. The next slide. So Article 12 deals with all the new plants and trees that a new development has to comply. And now we are structuring the chapter, the article, to show these are the set of standards that you have to deal. It's lot trees, buffer trees, vehicle use trees, which are island trees, and some buffer required for parking island, for parking spaces, and street trees. Lot trees, we have in our code saying that every lot, depending on the use, so we have different, depending on the zoning district for residential, the lot sizes, or the office use of commercial or commercial use, we have a minimum of trees that are required for each lot. But lot trees can count all the buffer trees, the island trees. They can count towards these meeting this minimum lot trees. Preserved trees on site, so if you are preserving trees that have the function of a buffer tree, of an island tree, they also can count. But trees that are part of the minimum requirements do not count as replacement trees. So if we have And I'll explain, and I have an example to explain that. So they are treated separately. You have to account for the trees that are part of Article 12, and that is valid for a lot that is being developed that was wooded, and it's valid for a lot that had no trees. So in the end, they all have to meet those minimum required trees. But the one that was wooded has to also account for the fact that they are destroying, right? They are removing those trees. So that's why we treat them separately. In Article 12, we also are included language as the list of mitigations that people can apply, can use when they are requesting deviations. So before in the code, we have the flexibility into the standards. So any quantifiable measure in the code can be deviated from, and you may be asked to deviate, to mitigate. But the mitigation was not, there was no guideline. So we would negotiate with the applicant, a mitigation that made sense. When we wrote Article 8 for the architectural number design standards, we decided to establish this is the list of mitigations that we would like to see applicants using, because these are policies that the comprehensive plan encourage us to use, and we are talking about low impact development, the use of LED, use of for instance, charging stations, anything that is kind of beyond, it's not really required, but it's something that we would like to see new development, bringing. And communities for a lifetime. So we have a list. So we ended up writing this list in the code, and then we also said, and anything else, that makes sense to mitigate that particular deviation. So we are doing the same thing for the landscape. We are using the same list, and we are adding some particular, new standards that new mitigations that could be used. And then Article 15 deals with environmental preservation, with the tree replacement. So when someone applies for a project with us, the goal for preserving, for Article 15 is really to find a good balance between preservation and development. That's the goal. And when the applicant comes with a project, they have to show the tree survey. And the tree survey, they show the trees to be removed and trees to be preserved if they preserve trees. So also as part of the incentives in the mitigation, we have that if you meet 30% of preserved trees on site, that can count as a mitigation also to deviations. But the way we calculate the trees to be removed is depending on the caliber of the trees, we have a final number. So you may remove 200 actual physical trees, but depending on the caliber, they will be converted into more trees to be replaced. Because if you are removing a large tree, a 30-inch caliper tree is different than removing an 8-inch caliper tree. So we have a final number. So we do the conversion, but we have a cap for the number of replacement trees that an applicant has to account for. And the cap is twice the number of the lot trees required on site. And I'll give you an example. So, for instance, if you have 540 trees to be removed on site, the maximum replacement tree, the maximum lot trees, required trees on the lot was 120. You have a cap of 240 trees, 240 trees. So this is the maximum that you will be required to replace. 300 trees are already lost in this conversion and we understand that development destroys trees, right? And we don't want to over-penalize areas that are wooded. So that is the reason why we have a cap. Also, on top of that, if you preserve trees on site, we discount from the trees that you should be replacing. So in that example, I mean, you're preserving 40 trees, and again, we do the same calculation, depends on the caliper. So you may be preserving only 20 trees, but if each tree counts for 2 trees because of the calipers, we also give the credit the same way we request you to the replacement. So in that calculation, the final balance will be 240 minus 40, 200 replacement trees. And that is something that we have been using, for years in the city, and we think it makes sense, You have 2 options to deal with the replacement trees. Either you plant on-site, or you pay into the tree bank. And the idea of the tree bank is that the city would then balance out, the environment by planting those trees elsewhere in the city. Next slide, please. So this is the example of Your Oviedo Dentist, which was a project that we recently approved here in Oviedo Boulevard. The project proposed to remove 290 trees that, when we did the conversion with the caliper, it meant 367 replacement trees. The cap for the project was 58 replacement trees, which was twice the number of 15 trees per acre. They have 1 point something acres. That was the final number of 58 trees which was their cap. They preserved 6 trees on site. So the final number that they had to account for the replacement was 52. They paid $7,800 for the 52 trees. We charge $150 per tree, which actually is a number that is very outdated. We have been using this number for years, and so in the rewrite, we'll also propose, to update that number. And Chris gave me a new number that is more around $225.
That includes the tree and the labor to install it, to plant it. It's just the cost of the tree.
This is just the cost of the tree.
Just the cost of the tree. What would it cost to plant a tree? So there's your new basis.
That's another good point that we may.
Or some fraction thereof.
Yeah, or something like that, or something that is reasonable. Yeah. So, so the applicant in this case, the required trees that they had to plant on site per Article 12 was 41 buffer trees plus 12 island trees, 54 trees. So these would be required for the same project regardless of the original site, right? So a site with no trees would end up with 54 trees. So there is a request or something that we discussed with some developers. They wanted us to include in the replacement trees the number of required trees, the ones that are required per Article 12. So in this case, if we would agree to count the required trees, there will be no replacement for the 290 trees that were removed on site. So that is something that we think does not make sense, right? I think that's why we want to treat them separately. We have, an account for, how trees should be replanted on site, and an account for the trees that should be on site. Next slide, please. So the tree bank, since it was created, so since 2007, we collected $462,000 into the tree bank. Recently, we approved a policy on how to use that money. That goes to a dedicated account, and I discussed with the Public Works Director. Usually it's the Public Works Director and the Parks and Rec Director that use the money, because they are the ones that deal with the right-of-way in our parks. But this money could fund Arbor Day, and they fund replacement trees on city property and parks, and also along the city streets, city right-of-way. We also had a look on the deviations, that we have, that we processed since 2006. We had 137 requests for deviations. 44 were related to landscape issues, 5 related to lot trees, 35 related to buffer trees, 1 related to island trees, and 3 related to street trees. Because a new development also has to provide street trees. I mean, if that lot has already trees, street trees planted, that condition is already met. If not, the new development then has to provide the new street trees. And again, the mitigation can be done either on-site mitigation, and we discuss case by case, or also payment into the tree bank. We have researched other cities, so the next slide, to see how other cities, because when we deal with developers, we always hear, such city, you are the most strict, city, and we are always the hardest one. So we did the research. So Winter Springs, it's much stricter than us. So they do not count required trees as replacement trees. Credits are given only to preserve trees in conservation areas dedicated to the city, so not preserves trees on site, and there is no cap for the number of replacement trees. They also have a tree bank. Winter Park, they count required trees as replacement trees, but they have no cap. So you would have to account for, all the trees that are being removed. And there are no credits given to preserved trees. Lake Mary, also, and each one has a different schedule, right, for, for the caliper, how many trees you need to replant. But Lake Mary has no cap and also has a tree bank. In Altamont Springs has a cap and count the required tree, count as replacement trees. But the cap is a fixed number. It's up to 300 caliper inches per acre. So it has our varies depending on the use and on the size of the lot for residential. They also have a tree bank. So we think our rule makes sense. We don't over penalize wooded areas, but we also make them be responsible for accounting for at least partially to the trees that they are removing on site. This is going to be, I think, the most important issue being discussed, I think, in the rewrite of the article. We are not proposing to change it. Actually, we are clarifying it in the code to be clearer, that they are separate issues and what count against what, right? I think that's the last, and so I just wanted to have your input. We will be submitting the draft, and I want to submit it way before the public hearing, because if you want to ask questions, or have, come back to us and provide feedback, it's always welcome, so that the public hearing is smooth. Everybody knows what they are, reviewing.
So you're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the last item on our agenda. Are there any other items we need to discuss while we're all here?
Madam Chair, I just had a quick question for Teresa about what she just presented, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I'll be brief, I promise. Regarding the comparative study, what were their reimbursement rates for replacement trees or tree bank trees?
How much do they charge? We haven't checked, but that's a good. I think that's a good research to do, so that we propose ours.
The 150 price, what's the cost of maybe 2.5-inch caliper tree 10, 15 years ago?
Right. No, I agree. It seems low. One observation, I grew up in South Florida. We had lots of undeveloped land near the Everglades. And there was a time where there was a lot of trees. And the code was written in a way that made it difficult to develop those lots. And there was always an unfortunate forest fire that would occur on a lot that needed to be developed. And it just became as locally known as if, oh, they're going to develop that one next. And you would start to...
Oh, see, that's unfortunate.
I'm not saying, I'm not accusing anybody of arson, but
Yeah.
Sometimes
Jewish
accidents
lightning.
occur. What's that?
Jewish lightning, it's called.
Right, exactly. Are you from South Florida too? Do you remember what I'm talking about, right? And this happened all throughout Weston. Completely the area of Weston was all forest.
So
and
that's
and half of it burned to the ground.
We want to make it fair,
That's the
right?
point.
In a way,
Yeah.
that we are also, allowing development to occur, but
And not
we are
encouraging
also
people to commit crimes in order to...
We are also, accounting for the trees that are being destroyed, and I think if you remove 300 and you're just accounting for 50, I mean that is already a good,
That's fair.
that's fair,
Yeah.
right?
It's overly
I
fair.
would imagine that, yeah.
I agree with that.
I would say it's overly fair. I think it's not a good deterrent to the developers at this point.
No.
I mean, if you're doing a $6 million project in town and you have to pay $150 for, let's say, 100 trees, it's a kick in the bucket. Total amount of profit they're making off
But
of
we're not,
it.
Yeah.
that's not enough anymore.
I mean, we see it too many times. I mean, I go to council meetings too and see it comes in and says, oh, they're just automatically going to pay to the tree fund because it's nothing to them.
It's easier
It's
for
not
them
a
to tree
deterrent
fund it,
at this point. So if
Yeah.
you really want trees preserved, the tree bank's not working. I mean, it's just not. I mean, and plus because it puts the burden on the city, like it said in the slide, the trees are going to get planted in city property areas or along streets. Like, so why does it become the city's burden to plant all these trees because the developer just was like, I don't want to do it. So
Well, sometimes it's hard for them, depending on the
then find another
On
lot
the
that doesn't require removal of 300 trees when there's one right next door that has half of that amount.
The developers are following minimum standards from the city, any city. So they're not really making a decision, I don't want to plant trees or anything like that, the city.
No, they
Follow minimum standards. They can only get what the city's.
No, they can plant on site. The replacement, they can plant on site. Many times they get out of area, right, to plant, or they run into issues like visibility, right, to the business, to the sign. So they want, so they end up saying, because there is a way to pay into the tree bank, they think it's easier for them to pay into the tree bank. But I agree, I mean, the amount that we charge, that we should be updating, it's not something that would prevent anyone from developing, right? So,
I mean, I think to that point, I mean, my opinion is that our codes seem to be too developer-friendly and not preservation-friendly.
I can agree with that.
You know, that's the point I'm making, is that what we've got in place, yeah, it may have worked 10, 15, 20 years ago, but now with the space that's left, it's just not a deterrent. And you see that with every clear cutting that's occurred in the last 5 years. I mean, it's obviously not a deterrent.
So, I know I'm new to the board, but I'm actually a landscape architect. So, I have an opinion on each of those slides from the developer standpoint, from a landscape architect standpoint, and probably from somebody that lives from the city standpoint. And I don't know if now would be a good time to talk about all of it, but I mean, I was trying to think in my head what's the most pertinent thing from a developer and I think from everybody's is that when that code is written, in the sense of you're removing 300 trees, you have to mitigate those 300 trees. It's not fair to the developer, to the city, to anybody to have to pay for trees that maybe are diseased. Like if there's a way when you get the survey and you're clear cutting to have, if the trees, 2 inches or smaller, that you don't have to take that. And then you don't have to do that multiplication so we don't have to have a cap, like if 300 are required, 300 are required. If it's fair, if it's like that tree is diseased, an arborist or surveyors looked at it, it's at risk to the public to keep that tree, so take it down. Kind of goes over the hurricane stuff too in the future. That's just like the first comment that I have. That's more of as a professional because there's nothing more frustrating trying to explain to a client like why they have to mitigate for a tree that has no leaves on it, that it's dying, it's completely hollow, and it's not a safe thing for anybody to be near. That's like a safety thing thing. That
I'll
is
be very,
hard.
I can see that. That has never been brought to us as an issue.
Yeah, it's
Has never been,
Right.
an issue. And usually when they do the survey, they just count the
right.
trees.
That you need to have you can't just have a surveyor out there. You have to have an arborist.
Yeah, so I think it's more
classifying the tree,
expensive
so it
to
becomes more
to have
expensive.
someone, to
But at
survey.
the end, hopefully, it all becomes a wash for the developer because the developer is the one paying for the surveyor and for the arborist. So it just depends on how you want to put the burden on the developers. That's the first broad statement. That's just kind of code. That's always loose in code. It's not just here in Oviedo. That's always loose because I don't think it's really thought of that way. The second thing is it is a little that we don't count any of the replacement trees, like that parking lot trees to go towards. Is a little that's a little strict. I'm not saying I'm not a fan of it because I would love to have more trees and more landscape. But I say that just because I've seen it because I've been in front of boards before for the city of Winter Park, for Orange County, for the city of Orlando, for several different municipalities as the consultant for the applicant applying. So I've had that type of experience. But you should look into the city of Tampa because they do something very interesting in their code that's been recently rewritten as well. And they do where if it's within, depending if it's within the city limits or or the CBD districts for the city of Tampa, they actually will put a value on the tree based on the value of the lot. So like if you have $1 million piece of property in downtown Tampa and you're removing a 30-inch oak tree, I mean, it is crazy what they're making. Basically, they're making developers to design around the existing historic specimen trees in the city.
That's what I want us to do.
It is really.
Yeah, but it's depending on the cost of the property.
Yeah, it's depending. We had.
But what is the rationale behind it? Because a tree is a tree,
Because there's only this is for like downtown.
right?
I'm stepping away.
No, it's not.
But a 30-inch tree is a 30-inch tree. Anyway.
Before the fireworks start,
What?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you probably know what 500 more. So the city of Tampa, they do it, and it was to the point where the developer barged the tree because it was going to be the way that it was going to be the most cost-effective for everybody to be able to get the high-rise to go up, or the mid-rise multifamily to go up, and to have it, they actually barged, it was like a 30-inch, it's like it's not a specimen oak, it's like a champion oak is the way the city has described these trees.
Well, we have champion trees too.
Okay.
We have it in the code, we don't have in the city.
Right.
So they have to be
do.
recognized
So
by
it's
city
just-
council as a champion tree.
So the way that they have to, if they can't meet the minimum or mitigated trees for the site, they have to pay into the bank how we would have our developers here as well, except they put the value, it changes per value of the lot, of the land. So if you have, land in the center of downtown that's more valuable than land that's way out, the developer has to pay more into the tree
So
bank.
a percentage of the value of the land.
So I don't see the rationale for that, right? Because it is.
No, but you're right. Your statement earlier, a tree is a tree.
Is it?
Kind of like.
But I see what their point is
But it's
coming.
not.
It's kind of like when you're saying, like, what's $150 for a developer when it's, millions of dollars. It kind of,
But we don't have any of that kind of land value here anyway.
I'm just giving you different examples.
In
that
that
way
delta,
to
right?
help you guys look at different case
Or
studies.
what you can sell on it.
This is newly written, so we're actually kind of struggling through this process right now because the city's kind of not figuring it out as they go, but, they're learning from it. But
50 town.
it's been,
What's that kind of acreage around here now?
it's been during the review process.
Like a commercial lot bigger compared to a commercial lot developed.
Right, they have, I don't know exactly how the appraisal is of that, but it's just a different way of,
Downtown Tampa is mostly commercial property anyway, so they're going to be valued at a higher rate. That's where that would come in. So if you do have $1 million lot, and they're going to put a value of trees at 10% value of the lot, then okay, or 5%. I don't think it would be 10%, but say it's 2 or 3%. Probably is where is that about where it's at?
and it has to do with the open space requirements for a downtown area to do like how much, there's a lot of the calculations of how they come up with the numbers or how you have to plan it to give the best solution to the to the owner, to the developer is exhausting.
Yeah,
And it's
I could
So-
sort of see the value for a downtown area, but.
Yeah, for Tampa, it's city.
It's
of
just an
Tampa.
example.
They're
It was just
well, it
a
makes
way of
sense. for
doing
city
it.
No,
of
it makes,
They don't have
it makes
trees.
sense for Tampa,
That's the
Orlando,
rationale.
Miami.
That they don't have trees.
The really nice lots have really nice trees, and the rest of it's
Oh.
all.
I would imagine that they don't have many trees
Right.
in the
So if you
downtown,
wanna
so they
develop
can.
in the city of Tampa, if you look at the more expensive properties, like, South Tampa, beautiful tall trees, very, very, very expensive property. If you look at other parts of Tampa, no trees. So that's where that rationale is, because when people want to come in and develop these very expensive lots, like Tommy was saying before, they can afford it. Not to paraphrase, but so when somebody wants to develop these really nice lots and have beautiful trees, they don't want to detract from the beauty of the city and the limited trees that are already left. No more new trees are growing in Tampa. So I think that's the rationale behind the value of the lot equation, because their thought process, and I don't know, but the thought process is, if they're going to develop this expensive lot and put this really expensive property here, they can afford to either keep this tree or put it somewhere else, like on a barge.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
So, but they did.
They had to.
And that's
I
the
mean,
point. And so they preserved this beautiful old tree, and they were willing to do it. And why not? I agree with Kathy. Why don't we do that here? We have a lot of beautiful, very, very old oak trees that are being knocked over.
Oh, it drives me nuts
Yeah,
to see
and
them
then we
come
have
in
like
and just
a crate burn we put in the median to
bulldoze
replace a
everything.
500-year-old oak. It really doesn't make sense. We really do need to have more emphasis on preserving the natural beauty of what we have here, what we had here. Because they are running out of land. And if there's a lot, like everywhere near me in like the Bean Manor area, they're like, oh, we could fit 5 homes there. And they knock down all the beautiful old trees, and they put like 17 townhomes there. And they put a couple crepe myrtles and a live oak near the street. And that's, I think that's what Kathy's point, and not to speak for you, but you're right. I mean, we do need to make it harder for people to destroy really nice trees. They're knocking down a sweet gum. Who cares?
Teresa, what you were saying about the champion trees, tell us about that.
So in the code, we have, the definition of a champion tree, and it has to be approved by council. But I asked Brian, have we ever had any champion tree in the city? And said no. So champion trees have to be,
Like the one that was in the Deltona that was there.
or in Sanford,
Or somewhere, or somewhere where it was there for however long,
Yeah.
and it caught on fire. and then-
Senator.
Senator, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a champion tree.
That is a
But-
champion tree.
But is there a definition for caliber of the champion tree?
No, we have heritage trees, which are 30-inch in caliber. So these are considered heritage trees. So these ones, we have more, it's inch by inch for the replacement. Because we have a schedule, as I didn't put it here, but we have a schedule. And we only count trees that are 8 inches and larger. So smaller trees, we don't count for the replacement, which is already, so there are more trees that they are removing that are not accounted for. But heritage trees are, so she gave me the champion trees. Determination that a tree is a champion tree shall be made by the city council after recommendation of the city tree board, that we don't have. The city arborist shall keep a permanent record of all trees so designated by the city council. The city council may grant tree replacement credits upon granting a champion tree designation. The designation of a tree as a champion tree may occur in any one of the following ways. An applicant may request designation of a champion tree as part of any master plan, preliminary subdivision plat, or site plan application. To do so, the applicant shall submit an expert evaluation by a landscape architect, horticulturalist, certified arborist, or other horticultural expert as part of the application. B, a property owner may request its designation at any time. Rarely you have a property owner, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
There's no list of trees that are 30+ inches.
What do you mean?
30 inches bigger diameter in Oviedo.
Correct.
There's no list. I bet there's
No,
some
the
that
champion
exist.
trees. You're talking champion trees.
There's definitely
I have
some
some.
that exist.
Well,
They're
there's
probably-
trees all
yeah.
over Oviedo. My point is, there's no master list of where these trees are.
Is there,
Years ago, a company was hired on a tree board, and we paid for some company out of some other state to serve the entire city and neighborhood at that time. Of course, I'm sure it's changed. but there was a master list of every city tree.
Kristen, with what you're doing, do you see other cities that have something above, between the Heritage and the Champion, where it's a certain caliber, and those just simply
I think that
don't
that
come
is the
down?
range. That is like what you just, what do you mean, like between
Is there
20
a
to
s-
30, is that what you mean? Or
Well, is there something that says, maybe if 30 is a heritage tree, if you get to a 50 caliber, that simply can't be taken down, period?
I don't, no, I don't think that that's possible. Unless it's in a park or public land or,
Not that you got to work around, develop around it.
I just don't think that, because it's, if it's private land, then it's private land.
Yeah, the only way around that is to exit at 10% with the property value.
Well, so the way, to try to preserve is making harder for them to replace or make it more expensive to replace, right?
Or more
Maybe-
expensive to put into the bank.
Yeah, the monetary thing is definitely a thing that should be looked
Definitely,
at.
yeah,
for
a
sure.
way
And is
to-
the minimum, are you going with like 100 gallon? Is that what you're thinking, like 100 gallon oak cost? Is that skyrocketing? You need to be at like
The
$500.
$150 cost was the cost of a 30-gallon, 2.5-inch line of pipe. It's, what was it,
It's not that expensive.
225,
For just a 2-inch oak, is that what?
2.5,
Two
right?
and a half inch line.
That's the minimum that we,
What was the 15 years ago when Walmart put their application in, they were going to bring in that machine that was basically going to pick up that tree on that site. They were bringing it overseas from Europe. They were literally going to pick it up, root ball and all, and move it back on the site. What site was that? I thought that was one, like the biggest tree we had in the city. Again, this is 15 years ago,
Okay.
came before the board, and
I can't remember that.
I know the hospital's there now.
I remember, I do remember.
The biggest one I know of going on Orangewood, Rosie Road. Palm tree going right through the center of it.
So we have a champion designation, but we don't have any champion trees.
no, and
So
so,
we don't have a survey, so we don't know how many years we have to wait before we grow one. Right? Is that
well,
basically what it is?
there are three ways. Two come from the applicant or the property owner. So it's hard to have a property owner volunteering,
Sure.
to have more restrictions on their land, right? So that will be. The third option was the city arborist may recommend such designation as part of the review of any application for development, stating in writing the reasons for such designation, or may make such designation as part of an overall tree protection planning program for the city or portion thereof. And I'm not aware of any application. That's what I asked Brian, do we have any champion tree, that was designated? I think the city bought a property in Riverside
Yeah.
because of
Balcony.
a huge
That's
tree.
the biggest one we have in there.
So Brian said, well, that is the closest, and that property was,
Where at?
I think it's Riverside.
Of Riverside Park itself?
No, it's in Riverside.
No, it's a
Balcony.
lot.
Oh.
It's a lot that, the city bought to preserve that tree.
Oh, okay.
So that is, so we have that. But even that was not designated as a champion, but we bought the lot to preserve the tree.
And we don't have a tree board.
We don't have a tree board.
So is that something that either needs to be,
Corrected, yes.
people need to be put on it, or it needs to be written out of the code and
This is part of the rewrite. We also don't have now a city arborist. That's another thing. So we are changing also, we're hoping to have a city arborist. We want Chris to do the certification so that he becomes a city arborist. But because we don't have one right now in staff, we need to change the code to say land use administrator or, his designee.
Okay. It's over by you.
Yeah.
But yes, if you have any more comments, and we'll be submitting the draft. Yeah, and then I don't see us going to that route of
I know, I was just
Tempo.
letting you know, like, different.
Yeah, just because
Still
I think
Florida,
it's...
but other cases, local-ish.
I saw one of that is the street trees.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it should be looked into or not, but I have street trees, but 6-foot planting strip. They're oak trees, live oaks and laurel oak. And they were planted in like 1985. Totally destroying curbs and sidewalks and streets. So is there possibly a wider landscape strip with different trees and stuff?
On sidewalk on one side, they were already planting trees in the I don't know if it was you or Dave that talked.
Not me.
I wouldn't think you could do that in like a subdivision or,
There's a city in Florida that doesn't have sidewalks, and they make you walk on the road.
Really?
That's why it was not me.
we don't want to do that.
I would have said no.
I think there's a curb that separates you from a car,
But you do make a valid point, because
When sidewalks raised up at all,
it's happening everywhere along the city.
it becomes a big, cost of maintenance issue, right? And a safety hazard, which is bad news for the city.
When we went-
On sidewalks.
When we went through the land development codes a year ago, didn't we discuss that on one of them? I can remember discussing it on one of them. One of the street line ones was like, I think it was like a 4.
We extended the distance.
It was a
between-
4-foot buffer or something
We
between the
extended the distance
sidewalk and the
between the
street. We
trees
said
to
it needed to
mitigate
be
some of that.
bigger to accommodate the trees we wanted to put in there.
I think it was a site plan
It was a
related
site
issue.
plan.
So we were discussing a specific site plan and was
I can
not.
tell you, it was part of that, when we were looking at where we was going to go downtown or something.
That's exactly, yes, I remember the meeting. It was one of our first meetings. I remember because we were talking about the new downtown area, and you were talking about the trees that were required. And I said, these are live oaks that you have here. I said, these are going to grow huge, and they're going to, because you were requiring a certain, it was specifically regarding the townhomes down in Vito in the Park. And I said, those are going really close to the road where you're requiring them. There's not a lot of room. And then I talked about that specific issue, and I remember you said that, oh, that's something we need to look at.
I think it was in the code we were talking about, not a site plan. It was something in the code when we were looking at that.
When we
that
talked about, we
thing
talked, it was
about
a
street buffer.
site development, because we were looking at maybe increasing the distance between the trees to somewhat mitigate that, because live oaks and laurel oaks are very aggressive growers, especially tree-wise. I mean, I'm not an arborist or a landscaper, but, I mean, from my own personal opinion, I had one in my front yard that just ripped out my whole driveway. And it was so close to the house that I was able to get it cut down. But the city in Valencia, Spain, and in the suburbs as well, what they planted was Valencia trees, oranges.
And it smells great.
It does.
Yeah.
And, huh?
It attracts rats.
Well, we got rats anyway.
Maintenance.
No, but, I mean,
It kind of
in
goes
general.
somewhere.
Well, maybe on your side of town you got rats, but there are no
But
rats on my side of
but
town.
I'm not saying that that's the tree to use, but they're still using trees that still provide shade, is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And they're not as aggressive grower. I mean, because otherwise all the city sidewalks would be ripped
So
off.
that's the thing, for in our code right now, street trees can only be canopy trees, have to be large trees.
But that's what we talked about.
And at one point, we discussed, and we allowed in Article 8, so maybe that's, we allowed the opportunity to, because right now is one street every 50 feet of linear right-of-way, and we allowed medium-sized trees every 30. So we would, decrease the spacing and allow medium-sized trees. When we had an arborist in the city, the arborist was against, medium-sized trees. He wanted large trees. But internally, and we have, and Chris knows about that, we have an internal fight sometimes with Public Works, because we want the trees, but Public Works is the one that deals with the maintenance. So
I'm on your side.
sometimes but that's the thing, so we have to reach a common ground, right? Because sometimes they would vote for not having the tree. We live in Florida. If we want to stimulate people to walk for all the good reasons, right, we need to provide shade. So we need to come to what is best. So the ideal would maybe a canopy tree if we had the width of the landscape width, that is enough to support, a mature canopy tree. If not, then, can we have, smaller trees, medium-sized trees, and what kind of medium-sized trees would give, a reasonable, shade, and with the less interval, and what kind of canopy trees? I mean, should we be advocating to? Is it only live oaks? Do we have other size, other types of canopy trees that would be less invasive with the roots and all that? So these are the issues that we have been discussing, and if you have a good input.
50 feet is actually pretty standard. I mean, that's
Yeah.
farther than a lot of other municipalities. They'll do 40 feet. But the history of the laurel oak and the live oak thing is actually kind of usually when sidewalks are being busted up, it's laurel oaks is usually what are doing.
It's the more superficial one?
It's the most, yeah.
Yeah.
It was during the 80s and 90s. It was exactly what you said, was that nurseries were pushing laurel oaks because they grow really fast. They give you lots of shade quickly. Except there are ways, far less superior than the live oaks are much better because they're, the slower the tree grows, the stronger the wood is, the more it's a desired tree because it's gonna withstand the storm. So the ones that are falling throughout the city, I would say 85% of the time are laurel oaks. That's what fell in 2004 in Winter Park. That's what paralyzed the city because they had so many laurel oaks.
And
So
was-
it's kind of one of those we learn from our, as you go on. Like I haven't in the 14, 13 years that I've been in Florida, I haven't once specified a laurel oak on the plan ever. So they say they're still available, but they're available for buffer plantings way out in the woods, like where it's not.
The aggressive is not
Yes,
it doesn't affect anything.
And that's the
yeah,
same
sure.
place that you're going to put.
But that may be a
and,
point.
Sweet gums. It's the same thing. So we're not landscape architects that I work with are not making that mistake anymore. But it's going to take 70 years before you see the change, or 30 years before you see the change. So right now we're still seeing the effects from the 80s and 90s when all the laurel oaks were planted. So that's a very broad statement, but it's pretty, in the Central Florida, it's pretty accurate. But for the medium-sized trees, you're going to get your crepe myrtles. That's what you're going to get because they grow, they don't need a lot of water, so there's a lot of other sustainable issues going on with people planting those trees. And the reason why live oaks are always kind of the street tree to go to are because they're native, so they're on the Florida-friendly list. They get huge, they provide a lot of shade eventually, and they're the picturesque Spanish moss look of the southern United States. That's why people want to see that when they come here and we're a tourist area. There's all kinds of reasons why those ones are selected. And it's what the nurseries grow. So that's what we have available to us for when we're designing. We try to design to the things that are, seems like
Available.
It's just a tree, but there's a lot of,
There's a lot of technique into it. Sure.
there's a lot of design and aesthetics and science. Mechanical science.
So, and the point sometimes when people raise issues with the trees that are being planted, these are all provided by landscape architects that submit to us. I'm an architect, but I'm not a landscape architect. I cannot compete with a landscape architect when we're talking about, especially, native plants in Florida. I'm not from Florida, so I cannot win that discussions. And I really count that the expert is doing their job. But for instance, live oak is something that we can remove from the list of the street trees.
No, I would keep it.
You keep it?
Oh, yeah. They're hard to come by.
No, laurel oak.
Laurel
Sorry,
oak.
Laurel oak. If
you could
if they
remove it, yeah.
if they don't make sense for if they create a lot of maintenance issues.
Yeah, that would be one.
That is
I
something
would-
that we control, right?
If I see it on the
regulation.
list, I just don't even, I look over it because I know it's not available in the nurseries. Because the nurserymen aren't going to grow it if people aren't buying it.
And after '04, so many
Yeah,
people
they're not buying
wouldn't
it. So they're not,
replant
they're not
them.
even growing it anymore. So that's one thing too. That's like a different, different types of people communicating across the field of how to get it. Because, I feel like I'm pretty versed in nursery trade, so to speak, just because I'll call nurseries and say, are you going to have this available if I design it now? Is it going to be available in 6 months for the contractor to buy it and install it? And if they say no, then I'll call around, just that type of stuff. But laurel oaks are You'll find them, but they're going to be saplings, and they're probably going to be for a buffer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find a 3-inch, I don't think.
Anything else? Well, we want to welcome our new members. You kind of had a good night tonight to do a work session rather than just start right off with one of our public meetings. This is a much easier way of doing it, I think. If we can start with you, if you'll just introduce yourself, like in 3 sentences, and
Me, 3 sentences?
how long you've been on the board, and what you do.
I don't even know how long I've been on the board. Daryl Lopez, I've been a city resident for 25 years. I've been on this board, 3-4 years now? Something like that. I came from code enforcement. Huh? Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, welcome.
I'm Kathy Moore. I've been on a city board since about 2000. Started out as BOA and then BOA and LPA, former LPA.
PZA.
PZA. LPA and BOA became PZA. And then that name got changed to LPA again. And so when I said earlier about our name changing, it kind of depends on which way the wind's blowing sometimes, I think, as to what we're going to be called. But I've been on this board and several others for the city in this length of time.
Yeah, we were on charter review together.
Yeah. And the downtown boards as well. Larry?
I'm Larry Wright. Been resident since '93, live in Riverside. Been on the board since about '99, 2000, about the same time. Been on this board since its inception, since it was combined when the BOA and the LPA were combined and made one new board. So I'm in civil engineering by trade, mostly military, but done commercial. So that's my background. Welcome.
I'm David Pollock. I'm new. I came on board like a year ago, maybe less. I don't even know anymore. And I'm an attorney by trade. I work for the government. And it's a lot of fun. And these guys know a lot. So you guys are going to have a good time on this board. Tommy?
Okay, I don't want to follow that. But, Tommy Minton, I came on the board a year ago with David. That was the first time being involved with any kind of city government stuff. I mean, I grew up in the area. I'm a graduate of Oviedo High School, moved away, came back. Lived outside the city, moved away, came back. So I'm an educator. I've been in higher ed for my entire career.
And we have already introduced to them. We had our orientation with both of them, so we had an opportunity to sit down.
So Kurt, you want to tell us about you?
Okay, Kurt Gashlin. I've been here in Oviedo the same as since 1991. I've been on, this is now the 4th board I've been on since that time, plus I was on Board of Justice in Seminole County for a little while. I too work in civil engineering by trade. And, I'm a Oviedo citizen first. So,
I'm Kristen Swetland. I've been in Florida since 2005, and I've been here in Oviedo since 2006. I'm a landscape architect. I've worked for a multidisciplinary engineering company for 11 years, and now work for a private landscape architecture, civil engineering, land planning private company. Love Oviedo.
Well, we're glad to have you aboard. If there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Have a second?
Do we have a future meeting date at this time?
Mm-mm.
No, we don't. We will have to resend you all the new dates, right? And we don't have anything scheduled that We almost had one sign, for Publix, but they ended up changing to be a 14% deviation to be staff approval, so.
How far down the road do you see the changes to the code that you're making?
So we have the first draft prepared. We didn't have a chance yet to sit down with Brian to have a complete review. We just did partial discussion. But we have now, I shared with two members before the meeting started, the development review division. We have vacant the development review manager position and the planner too. Dag Marie also left us. She went to Osceola County some weeks ago. So we have two positions open, and we have now the planning tech position open as well. So we have 3 positions open, and we have a bunch of projects being submitted. So I'm also doing review. Notch is helping with development review as well. So every time that happens, the land development code slides to the side, and we have major development coming, to discuss with us. We have been having 3-4 pre-apps a week, so that shows that there is something coming in the pipeline, and it's all exciting, but we need time, right, to do that. But I wanted to at least have the first discussion on the landscape today. That's why I brought without the ordinance and said that it's going to be at least a big picture discussion. But we are hoping to bring it. It's not going to be. It's not a major change. It's more shifting things from different places, but also adjusting. To see, taking all the boards that should not be mentioned here, and all the and adjusting the minor, the standards. What makes sense for us to require from development. So yeah, it's always time consuming, right, to change the code.
Oh, yes. You going to say something, Mr. Wright?
I was. While we're still in discussion, we haven't adjourned yet. Last meeting we had before the end of the year, I had asked about the possibility of a work session on transportation, or transportation consultant, and to get some better understanding as to the logic that all development falls within the approved transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any progress on that? Any discussion items on that?
Yeah, we have discussed internally. So what we are doing, do you want to talk about it, the comprehensive plan, the capital improvement element, that we are updating the capital improvement element of the comprehensive plan. And so with that would be a good opportunity to bring to you our consultant, our public works director, to discuss the levels of service and what changes and improvements are planned in the pipeline. Our consultant also left the company, so now we have a new member of the same firm, HDR, that is now working with us. So the one that historically Jessica Dean has worked with us for the last couple of years. She went to FDOT. And we discussed with Public Works, because they are doing a study along Mitchell Hammock. So they hired someone to do a study just to see, what would be
Access management plan. Access management plan.
For Mitchell Hammock. So that also will be an opportunity for them to bring, and discuss with. So we are preparing, but we would have to have the material, the updated material to bring to you. But traffic is more and more a concern from us, right, from all of us. So.
Anything else? Okay, we've got the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion. We stand adjourned.